Well, firstly, I think this is the strangest research project that I've ever been involved in. Why? Because we only managed to meet once face to face, and that was for our launch conference way back in Sala Europa in Skifanoia at the EUI. And little did we think back then that within months our whole program project would be challenged by a global pandemic that has asked us to really work under conditions that we had never worked under before. And I think I want to really mark my appreciation of all the work that was done in extraordinary circumstances. I know it wasn't easy for everyone at all times, family commitments, working from home, etc., the absence of face-to-face. And if I have one big regret, it is that our docs and postdocs and researchers did not get the opportunity to engage with each other in anything like they would have had we not had COVID. I think it's a loss. But there's nothing really we could have done. I'm also very heartened at the extent to which people just got on with it and got the research done, and all of the stakeholder meetings that we had to put online, etc., etc. So I think we have to give ourselves a cumulative collective clap on the back. We got the work done and we got the project. I'd also like to express my appreciation of Frank's work, his scientific lead for the project during all of this time. A big thank you to TEPSA for organizing our final conference, but also all the other contributions. And doing so, as of Monday, we were still all going to Brussels, and it certainly was under extreme conditions again that we had to shift to online. And I think, given the state of COVID in Europe, that was the prudent and judicious thing to do. So a big thank you to TEPSA, to Julia, to all of the TEPSA team, and to Jim, of course. Then a big thank you to all of the researchers and the leaders of the different work packages, because these consortiums only work if you have distributed leadership. They work best if the work packages get on with the work, but then we also need the sort of cross-fertilization. And what was very heartening again was there was quite a bit of cross-fertilization in the project over time. And I certainly think that in terms of the state of the art, we know much more about DI now than we did. I'm also very glad that we didn't restrict ourselves to DI, but had the experimentalist governance and the flexible implementation. And our discussion just now confirms how important it was to do that, but also the data sets that have been created and all of that. Can I also say that unfortunately our work is not over, because we've now got to get this final report done. And I know asking for a final report on the 3rd of December, knowing what happens between now and the end of the year is difficult. So again, we will be in contact with you in order to make sure that we do this as effectively and as pain-free as possible. And finally, can I thank my wonderful colleagues at the EUI. When we started this project, when we sat down and planned this project, I was obviously still in Florence, and now I no longer am. But I said always when I was in Florence that it was by far the best place to do organized collective research that I had ever come across. The support we get from the team enables academics to do what they do best, which is get the research done. So again, a very special thank you to Jo, our project officer, manager, without whom we simply couldn't have done this. And her reminders to all of us about our deliverables were very important to the successful conclusion, but also the way in which she handled all sorts of problems, questions, movement of people, movement of budgets, etc., etc. And finally, to our project officer in the Commission for, again, all of the understanding and the support. So lots of thank yous. And I do hope, and through DICE and other mechanisms, ECPR, the special network on DI, that we will continue to meet and to work together on this subject. But a very warm thank you from me to everyone involved. It has been a pleasure to work with all of you. Frank, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Brigid. I mean, I can basically only echo all the thank yous that you already expressed. Let me maybe add two. One specifically to all the participants and the speakers at this final conference, especially also to those from outside the InDivEU project who participated, contributed as panelists and moderators and discussants in this final conference. I think it was really enriching for this final conference also to go beyond, say, the confines of our own project and share our views and have them discussed by external participants. And of course, because you couldn't do that, I'd like to thank Brigid, who from the very beginning has really been the orchestrator of this project. I remember my stay in Florence one nice summer when she came up to me and said, okay, we should really do something together on this. And from this very moment, she's been very effective in bringing us all together and leading this project. So thanks a lot for that. And also, of course, bringing in the wonderful Robert Schuman infrastructure, yeah, to help us focus on the academic stuff and so that we could be sure that all the other things are very well taken care of. Thanks a lot for that. So, I mean, as you said, this is not the end. I mean, you mainly mentioned, let's say, the short-term commitments that we still have within the project, but I think our final conference has also revealed that this is not going to be the final word on research on differentiated integration. I think it has shown that differentiated integration will be a primary and fundamental feature of European integration as long as the European Union will be a negotiated order among diverse states dealing with contested policies and in which basic decisions will be made by consensus or supermajorities, which I think is a different way of expressing, well, it's going to be a fundamental feature as long as the European Union exists, because I think these say background conditions for the need to have differentiated integration will not go away. And I think what this conference also has nicely shown is both the scope and the limitations of differentiated integration in different ways. I think we had a very good discussion exploring the domestic scope of differentiated integration, which seems to indicate, yeah, this is an area where there is still some kind of a permissive consensus within the European Union to go ahead with one or the other type of differentiated integration to get things done. But we've also explored some of the limitations. Interestingly, one of the findings was that, yeah, indeed, differentiated integration, the way we defined it, might actually provide too little flexibility for the European Union, and that flexible implementation, experimentalist governance, or let's say operative ways of working around the legal limitations that member states have imposed on themselves, yeah, are actually needed or helpful to make differentiated integration work in the end. And I think another quite revealing feature was that There's one limitation, which is when differentiated integration becomes politicized. And interestingly, however, that seems to be much more the case with external partners of the European Union, where the politicization of differentiated integration seems to be larger than within the European Union. I think that was also a revealing finding of our discussions here. I think when it comes to research, we've also seen some limitations because differentiated integration is in itself such a differentiated exercise. There's a limit, yeah, let's say, to the generalizations we can make about differentiated integration. So yes, I mean, when you start from a very thin definition and you limit yourself to what is going on at the treaty level, I think, and that's what I've done in my work with Thomas Vincent, I think we can see some logic, some structure in this differentiated integration. But as we've seen, yeah, when you move to different contexts, and especially if you go beyond the treaty level, it's something that we already found out when we tried to study differentiation in secondary legislation, but I think that's even more so the case when we move on to flexible implementation, experimentalist governance. It all becomes very heterogeneous in itself, and you really have to look at specific cases, and it's very hard then to make generalizations that travel beyond, let's say, a specific context or specific issue areas. So I think we've also found out a little bit about the limits of studying differentiated integration as a unified domain of research. And my final point would be that one reason why the topic will not go away is that, yeah, it's still an important issue of political debate, and we've had some of that in our discussions too, and it features, let's say, also in our projections about the future of European integration as a core issue of debate and contention. So just to remind you of some of the things that we talked about during the conference. Is it really the case, as Enrico Letta said at the beginning, that with Brexit, the debate about multi-destination differentiation is essentially over, and that we can now deal with multi-speed? I think that's an open question. Others have also pointed out that maybe we are entering a different stage. I think in the last panel, Sebastian made this point where, and this is also something that we found, yes, differentiated integration has been, say, very instrumental, helpful in integrating new members, starting new policies at the European level. But now that these members are there and that these policies are in place, maybe differentiated integration changes its nature and becomes more, let's say, of an instrument of policy making rather than an instrument of, say, negotiating new policies. Another issue that we discussed with and after Mr. Letta's intervention was an interesting thought about, let's say, a more punitive use of differentiation rather than the accommodating use that has been in the focus of our research. So I think there are more than that, but these are some of the points that I think were, say, quite interestingly raised during our discussions at this conference. And I'd like to thank everybody again for contributing to these debates and on continuing to study these issues in the future. Thank you. And over to Jim, please.
Thank you very much. There's one thing you said, Frank, which I definitely agree with, and that is that there's no final word on anything related to European integration. It never ends. It's an ongoing process, and you will have a lot of things to study over the next decades, I'm quite sure. And I hope that it will be possible post-COVID that we can associate physically the students and the researchers to all of this. Obviously, Secretary-General of TEPSA, I want to thank all those involved, the ones who funded this, the Commission made this possible with the EU money, obviously the researchers led by Frank and Brigid. You have indeed, as Frank said in his opening remark, pushed the research frontier very far indeed. So you've now created a theoretical framework that allows us to comprehend digital differentiated integration, and to ensure an operational follow-up. Diversity is a fact of life in the Union, and differentiated integration is a way of handling that diversity. It is, as Lucia remarked in her opening speech, linked to the nature of the EU and the perception also of the EU citizens. A one-size-fits-all approach is not always the best answer to a problem. Frank, you talked about Enrique Letta. I thought his intervention was very good because it was provocative. He said three things which are not obvious as such. He first said that he was in favor of a big institutional overhaul, which is not mainstream policy nowadays. He secondly said, and you mentioned this, that Brexit definitely meant that we will only in the future talk about multi-speed and not about multi-destination. I'm not entirely certain of that. And thirdly, quite controversially, quite interestingly, he wants to apply a kind of Schengen to migration and even to some extent to the rule of law, with the possible result, of course, that you will push some of the present members of the present Schengen system out. So, but I think he did what he had to do in a thing like that, is to be a bit provocative, to shake everybody out of complacency. I must say that I very carefully followed the 5 panels. I think it was a very good mix of practitioners and researchers. I think there were lots of insights, lots of interesting, intelligent exchanges and new ideas. I initially had thought to summarize it all, but I give up because it's now 16:25, and I think you probably rightly be shot for trying to do that. Everybody must be very tired. I will simply say that for me, as a practitioner, there was a lot in this which I found interesting. It's not always the case with conferences, to be very honest with you. There were many things. I mean, the distinction between destination and speed, the fact that, you know, there's more to opt-outs than people think sometimes, you know, because after the opt-out very often comes the opt-ins. The fact that the economic integration has actually moved towards less differentiated approach is also interesting. I think overall, what is also interesting is that while differentiated integration can give rise to some risks and fears, actually, if you look at the history of the European Union, it has really allowed the European Union to move forward. If you think about the creation of the euro, if you think about the creation of Schengen and justice and home affairs and all of that, I was also quite interested in the assumption in one of the panels that the most likely scenario is a progressive development of the European Union. And I've always believed that, but I remarked in one of my comments that small steps can be quite big, as we have seen in 2020. I was also quite interested in the latest, discussion about how governments these things, or citizens and party affiliation. It's not something I would normally think about so much. And it is, of course, true that for governments, and that I can confirm, differentiated integration is a tool to solve problems. And all the attempts to transform it into a theoretical debate about a core Europe have actually failed. And so that is why the governments have a very pragmatic approach. External integration, I don't like the term, to be honest, because I think it's something very different, but the discussion was interesting about what it meant. Of course, I think external integration to some extent, in my view, is right when you talk about candidate countries, or maybe some neighboring countries. But it was an interesting debate, and I thought the various scenarios which were being looked at were very interesting. Finally, I think this question of differentiated implementation and flexibility in governance is an interesting one. Again, I think they're different in nature, but I thought it was very good to see this as a complementary tool, because after all, it is about talking about diversity. It's about talking on how to best manage a union of 27 very different member states, countries with very different histories, different economies, different languages, and all of that. So I think I will stop here. I would really thank everybody, all those who participated, the researchers and all that. And of course, if I may, as Secretary General of TEPSA, give a special thanks to the TEPSA Secretary team, to Miriam, Julia, and all the others. They are really a fantastic team. And I think we'll see this again next week at our big conference in Paris. I hope we can all meet physically for once. And I'm very much looking forward to that. But thank you very much. And I suppose I have to close this session now. That's probably my major contribution to this. Thank you very much indeed.